After Joshua gave me to his twin brother, I realized that the young master who had been married for 3 years had never had feelings for me. He loves my sister, I don't love you, the child that the family forced, he said. You can just have children with Jackson. However, when I appeared in front of him with a pregnancy report in hand, his eyes turned red. You've really fallen in love with my brother? I remained silent. There was a knock on the door behind me. The man's lazy voice came through. Sister-in-law, open the door. It's married for 3 years. Joshua, cold and aloof, never touched me. He said he couldn't break his vows due to practicing Buddhism, so I took the initiative to sleep in separate rooms from him, keeping our distance. Until his carefree twin brother, Jackson, returned from abroad, I accidentally overheard a conversation between the two of them. Jackson, you can take my place with Irene, Joshua said indifferently, as if casually mentioning a stranger. The next moment, with a lazy but mischievous tone, Jackson responded, Are you always praying and becoming foolish? She's not my wife. Wait, could it be? He paused for a moment, his tone suddenly more teasing, that you can't do it. Joshua remained calm, sitting on a cushion, idly playing with a white jade rosary between his fingers. I simply have no emotions for someone I don't love, he said in a straightforward manner, pinning me sharply in place with just one sentence. With a snap, the brush that Jackson had been playing with suddenly broke in his hand. Casually picking up the broken brush, he bent down. Oh? Is that so? Who do you love if not her? Joshua fell silent for a moment. My heart also raced at that moment. It wasn't until I heard him utter a name that I was all too familiar with. Christina. My cousin Christina, who was once hailed as the nation's first love, but had announced her retirement and emigrated overseas 3 years ago. Hearing that name, memories of the past came flooding back to me. I had known Joshua since we were kids. He fell seriously ill during his 3rd year of junior high, and after being sent to a temple for recovery, we lost contact. Our next meeting was during our senior year of high school when he took the initiative to send me a letter through someone. Opening the plain envelope, I saw the elegant and clear handwriting of a slim young man reflected in my eyes. Having been bored in the temple, but for me, who secretly admired Joshua, it was like the spark that sets off a wildfire. I thought he was hinting for me to go find him. So as soon as I had a break, I grabbed my homework and set off to the temple to see him. When we met, Joshua was dressed in a plain white robe, as elegant and aloof as ever. His gaze shifted to behind me. Did you come alone? I couldn't discern the disappointment in his eyes, as I earnestly took out the letter from my pocket. Didn't you write it only for me? Joshua paused for a moment, his brow slightly furrowed, but quickly relaxed, turning to lead me around the temple. 10 minutes later, he brought me back to the entrance. Okay, you've seen enough, go back now, he said. Who didn't catch his disappointment, said sincerely, is that all? Joshua had finally arrived, only to lead me to tour the temple. On the way up the mountain, he frowned with an expression that was unusually unsatisfied when he saw that I had brought Jackson, just done practicing the violin. If you like him so much, come meet him on your own. I don't like him, Jackson said, setting off with a particularly disdainful expression identical to Joshua's. No way, didn't I just like that? Let me know what you do like, and I'll find it for you right away. Jackson halted his pace, glanced down at me, legs taking 3 stairs, with a determined stride. The summer wind carried his words to my ears. Not telling, did I scoffed, quickly catching up to the black-clad youth carrying a violin case. No need to tell. At the entrance of the temple, Joshua was already waiting. Upon seeing Jackson by my side, his expression darkened abruptly. Why did you bring him here? Before I could respond, Jackson sneered, Can't I come? With that, he pushed his way past Joshua and into the temple without another word. The temple visit this time was just as unpleasant. While Jackson was in the bathroom, Joshua said coldly beside me, Next time, bring a girl with you. I couldn't understand his logic. Why? Are you gender biased? After a moment of silence, he suddenly looked down at me, Because I'm jealous. Can that be the reason? His sudden bluntness caught me off guard, leaving me unable to recover for a long time. I thought my youthful crush had finally received a response. So I eagerly shared this with my cousin Christina, who I had a better relationship with, and invited her to come next time. She didn't refuse. And when Joshua saw the two of us together, his eyes lit up. At that time, I thought he was happy because I hadn't brought a boy with me. Looking back now, he melted only when he saw Christina. And this truth, I only came to know 3 years after getting married. Standing at the study door, my eyes involuntarily reddened, my heart feeling like it was being pricked by needles, aching all over. Joshua, you never loved me, did you? Then why did you marry me? I sat on the couch for a long time. Tears eventually fell to the ground with a snap. Joshua came to the living room at some point, standing tall in the shadows, his silent eyes exceptionally cold. After staring at me for a long time, he finally grew impatient. Are you done crying? Let's talk business. I didn't say a word, just hastily wiped away the tears on my face and walked up to him, trying to kiss him on tiptoe. But in the next moment, he pushed me away abruptly, making my waist hit the table corner hard. It hurt. But it was nothing compared to the tenth of disgust that Joshua's eyes conveyed to me. I told you on our wedding day that I couldn't break my vows due to practicing Buddhism. What are you doing now? I stumbled as he turned away. What if Christina was standing in front of you? Joshua stood still, lost in thought, blushing and clenching the white jade rosary in his hand. He had developed feelings. But he was still pretending in front of me. Irene. Don't make trouble out of nothing. What happens between us has nothing to do with her, he lied through his teeth. I pierced through his falsehood. How does it have nothing to do with her? Wasn't it her you loved? He froze again, a hint of panic in his eyes. Did you hear that? Without waiting for my answer, he heaved a sigh of relief. Good, then I'll tell you the truth. I don't love you. The child that the family forced, you can just have children with Jackson. He looks just like me, so you shouldn't have a problem accepting him. His words, sharp as a knife, diminished my feelings for him over the 15 years. His nonchalant tone also told me how ridiculous my infatuation with him had been. I wiped away the tears that had surged once again, but my gaze met Jackson, who had been standing on the upstairs landing without my knowledge. Since I married Joshua, Jackson had gone abroad to study music. This was the first time we had seen each other in 3 years. He was just the same as before, with sharp eyebrows full of recklessness. And I was just a mess. Following my gaze, Joshua also saw his brother, standing perfectly still. He told the other person, I've already told Irene, you can stay here tonight. With that, he turned and left without a glance in my direction. Ignoring the presence of Jackson, I went mad and smashed the antiques in the living room to pieces. Finally, exhausted, I collapsed on the ground, covering my face and sobbing. Jackson came down the stairs, squatting by my side. Still want to smash things? I'll buy new ones for you. I shook my head as I sniffled, mustering a smile. Sorry, it's rare to see you after so long, and you witnessed all of this. Where are you staying tonight? I'll have a driver take you there. He stared straight into my eyes, his gaze inexplicable. Didn't Joshua tell me to stay here tonight? I stood frozen, staring blankly at him. It took me a while to find my voice. Are you sure? That's too absurd. How could Jackson agree to such a thing? Why not? He raised an eyebrow, speaking with unusual seriousness. I was startled by his seriousness. Of course not. I'm your sister-in-law. Jackson suddenly kneeled on the ground, aggressively advancing towards me. So what? Startled, I got up and tried to run, but he caught up and picked me up in a bear hug. Jackson. Are you crazy? You're overreacting like this? You were so heartbroken, and I thought it was because you forgot to cry. Well, I'll tidy up a bit. Take a rest, he said, placing me gently back on the couch. I rested for a while as he cleared up. Glancing at the tablet on the sofa, I took it by impulse. Typing in Christina's birthday, the tablet unlocked, and I opened messages. Sure enough, Christina was his only pinned message. The two of them are still chatting. Is this really okay? What if Irene is not pregnant? She must be pregnant. Sorry, I really didn't expect that my body couldn't miscarry. It's okay, it's my fault. I shouldn't have impulsively proposed to Irene back then. Now my parents like her so much, it's not easy to divorce. It's all your fault. That night was also a mess. I told you to buy condoms. You insisted that it's okay. Now look at what happened. Don't be angry, it's my fault. When Irene's child is born, I will immediately switch it to our child. Reading the chat history of the two, my face turned pale. No wonder. No wonder 3 years ago, Joshua suddenly proposed to me. No wonder he suddenly wanted a child. It turns out it's all for Christina. They have been together long before. At the same time, my phone vibrated. It was Christina. Dear Irene. I'm back in the country today. When shall we meet up? I didn't reply to her. Instead, I looked over at Jackson, who was sweeping over there. Words Joshua said not long ago popped into my mind. He looks just like me anyway, you should find it easy to accept. But they're completely different. Joshua wouldn't even bother to clean the floor. Sensing my gaze, Jackson walked over, raising his eyebrows in confusion. What are you looking at? Feeling unwell? That's different too. Joshua wouldn't come over to check on me. The tears that I had just wiped away began to flow uncontrollably again. He panicked for a moment, hastily wiping my tears. No, why are you crying again? Don't cry, I'll go talk to Joshua after cleaning up the house, all right? And, I know it's not proper to say this, but if things don't work out, you can find a man too. Haven't you seen many couples in our circle pretending to get along but actually drifting apart? No need to hang on to my brother, that idiot. With him showing such concern, all the pent-up grievances in my heart burst out. I understand all about the reasoning. But I feel so terrible. I've liked him for 15 years, why is he treating me like this? Jackson gently raised his hand to wipe away the tears at the corner of my eyes. I understand, would you like me to take you out for a drive to relax? That's how he used to comfort me. He knew I liked the feeling of the wind brushing against my face, so he would take me out for a ride on an electric scooter. When I was feeling sad, I would sit on the back seat and complain to him about various things, many of them about Joshua. Sniffing, I shook my head. Let's go some other time. I accidentally bumped into the table, my back hurts. He paused for a moment, then instinctively reached out to lift my clothes to check. But he stopped the moment he touched the fabric. Can I take a look? If it's serious, I'll take you to the hospital. He looked up. I involuntarily fell into his eyes full of concern, and nodded subconsciously. The hem of my short-sleeved shirt was lifted, revealing a bruise clearly reflected in Jackson's eyes. He clenched his hand resting on the edge of the couch into a fist, staring at the bruise for a long time. I felt my face inexplicably heat up, about to take off my clothes. Jackson, however, let go of his hand on his own initiative and stood up to retrieve some herbal oil from the medicine cabinet. Lie down. Watching Jackson rubbing his hands together, I hesitated for a moment, but ultimately obediently lay down on the couch. The reflection in the opposite French window showed Jackson's movements. With his height and long legs, he knelt on one knee at the edge of the couch, bending down to gently lift my shirt. The next moment, warmth spread to the left side of my lower back. It was so hot that my skin tightened instantly, and I instinctively turned to avoid it. Jackson raised his head, gazing deeply at me through the reflection in the window. Does it hurt? His voice was hoarse. It made my ears inexplicably warm. I suddenly lowered my head, burying my face between my arms and continuing, in a muffled voice, please go easy. After a moment of hesitation, Jackson suddenly chuckled softly. I was about to ask him what was funny when I felt the touch on my lower back again. This time, I resisted the urge to dodge. I just quietly gripped the pillow under my head, pushing it so hard that my fingertips turned white. With my head buried in the pillow, my other senses began to become overly sensitive and stealthily mischievous. I felt my skin tense up when he touched me and relax under his kneading. I heard his breath, seeming heavier than usual. I smelled a faint scent of soap emanating from him, very faint but unusually distinct. And every time he pressed harder, his knee beside me brushed gently against the side of my thigh. The air seemed to grow thinner. I was struggling to catch my breath. It was not until my phone suddenly rang that I felt like I had been pulled out of drowning. I hurriedly pressed the answer button. It was Joshua. Linger with Jackson too late, we're having dinner at the old house tomorrow. I tried to calm my emotions. Okay, got it. But my tone suddenly rose sharply. Jackson, not knowing what was going on, suddenly applied more pressure on my lower back. Ouch. I turned my head and glared at him. Can't you go easy? Jackson put on an extremely innocent expression, blinked his eyes a couple of times, and said, I didn't mean to hurt you. Irene. Joshua's voice resounded again, with a subtle hint of annoyance. What are you doing with my brother? I quickly realized that he misunderstood something. But I had no intention of explaining. Isn't this what he, Joshua, wanted? I chuckled lightly. deliberately sounding a bit coquettish. What does it have to do with you what we're doing? As soon as I finished speaking, Jackson suddenly bent down, his chin almost resting on my shoulder. I froze instantly, feeling his breath blowing on my earlobes, tickling. Brother, don't ask too much, go ahead and rest assured, I'll take care of her. Saying that, he gently scratched my waist with his fingers. I directly scolded him, grabbed his wandering hand, and accidentally cut his forearm. Jackson chuckled softly, saying, "Why are you still so fierce? You're wild like this?" Blushing with humiliation, I retorted, "Shut up. I don't want to hear you talk anymore." Jackson pursed his lips, casually nodding, "Okay, I'll shut up." However, he didn't let go of my waist. The sensation made it hard for me to form complete sentences. Joshua remained silent, listening to my banter with his brother. In the end, the call was hung up at some point. The next morning, Jackson insisted on making breakfast for me, claiming that he had mastered the skills of a 5-star chef overseas. In the kitchen, the broad-shouldered, narrow-waisted man wore a pink apron, bustling around, occasionally turning his head to make a funny face at me sitting on the couch. Joshua had never done any of this with me. He always had a distant expression when facing me. So, I had never mistaken them. They were completely different. Irene, come taste the freshly cooked spaghetti made by your brother. I'm coming. I moved over while still holding onto my slightly sore lower back, and he handed me a forkful of spaghetti. Holding it near my mouth, tasted. My hand paused in midair. I eventually set it down. I quickly ate the spaghetti on the fork, stepped back, and created some distance between us. It's good, just seems like it lacks salt. Jackson's face of hopeful pride instantly turned frozen. After a brief half-second of silence, he seemed to realize that this was a Waterloo for a 5-star chef, and awkwardly scratched his head. "Seems like I forgot to add salt." I was about to comfort him when he suddenly made a heart gesture towards me, "Because my love for you needs no words." Just then, Joshua returned. Standing in the doorway, his tall and slender figure, the white jade Buddhist bead swaying by his side, his gaze was tranquil yet inscrutable as he set his eyes on my hand clutching my lower back. 15 years of liking me and then turning to someone else? Irene, truly remarkable of you. Hearing his inexplicably sneering tone, I couldn't help but find it somewhat amusing. So amusing that I couldn't resist teasing him back. "You're not dead either. Do I have to mourn you for 3 years? Joshua fell silent, his thin lips tightly pursed into a line. I knew he misunderstood me and Jackson, but instead of explaining, I chuckled and lightly tapped my own waist, deliberately misleading him. "Besides, isn't this what you want? If I really get pregnant, are you going to be called dad or uncle by the child?" Some words seemed to pierce Joshua, his face expressionless, his gaze particularly gloomy as he looked into my eyes. At that moment, Jackson quietly rested his hand on my waist. His clear and bright eyes slightly curved, casually smiling, audacious, "Call him dad. After all, according to my brother's request, since we look exactly the same, we will take turns taking care of the child in the future. What do you think?" Joshua's gaze fell to the ground, his long eyelashes casting a shadow over his eyes, making his emotions unreadable. "It's up to you." He coldly dropped these words and then turned and went to the study. I patted the hand Jackson still had on my waist, saying, "The show's over, you can retract your hand now." But he suddenly exerted more force, tightly enclosing me in his embrace. I raised my hand to his chest to try and push him away, but it was futile. The only use was to feel his chest muscles. "After I acted for you, aren't you going to give me some reward?" He lowered his head, leaning in close to me. I subconsciously held my breath, becoming stuttered. "What reward? I've been your model, now help me paint a portrait of me." I instantly froze, awkwardly laughing. "Can you change your request?" "I haven't painted in a long time. I stopped painting 5 years ago. 5 years ago, my graduation project was reported for plagiarism. It was a design that I worked hard on. But for some reason, someone else published a design very similar to mine half a month before me, and I couldn't defend myself. In the end, I lost my degree certificate and was criticized by the entire school. I became a famous joke within the circle. I never picked up a paintbrush again. Well, that's not entirely true. There was one time. On Christina's 25th birthday. She insisted on being my model, begging me to paint her more beautifully, saying it was just to commemorate our relationship and friendship. I repeatedly refused. But she pouted and said, "Irene, don't you consider me a good sister? I was speechless for a moment. Joshua, who was quietly folding origami cranes next to me, suddenly looked up and said in his usual cold tone, "It's just a painting, what are you rejecting?" I bit my lip and finally agreed. But I made a request: do not post it online. However, that same night, after finishing the painting, I was trending on social media. Christina had posted the painting on Weibo with the caption, "Thank you for Irene's birthday gift. I really love it. I had hidden myself for so long, but she forcefully dragged me into the public eye." Someone immediately dug up my past, accused me of plagiarism, and told Christina to stay away from me. "I'm sorry, Irene, your painting was just too beautiful. I couldn't resist not posting it on Weibo." Christina held my hand, swinging it apologetically. I lowered my gaze, looking at our intertwined hands. It was the first time I said something harsh to her. "I'm not in a good mood right now. Can you please leave me alone for a while?" Christina stood there stunned. I turned and went back home. But the moment I walked in, I was scolded by my father and stepmother. "Why did you have to show off? Who cares if you can paint? If I had known you would bring shame to us like this, I should have broken your hands back then. Irene, your father worked hard to cover up the plagiarism incident, and now you've caused another mess. Do you think our family is made of money?" Each word felt like a blow on my back, bending me little by little. The pride and liveliness of the once pampered young lady were gradually worn away. It was as if from that day onwards, I became completely silent. When Joshua saw me again, he was even surprised to raise his eyebrows. "You've changed a lot," I smiled and said. "I have no choice. I can't afford to embarrass my family like before, in the end, due to family ties." I reconciled with Christina. But the passion from before was gone. Now, Jackson brings up the painting incident in front of me again, and I instinctively try to avoid it. But he looks at me seriously, his dark eyes hiding a sky full of stars. "Irene, you once said you wanted to become a great painter." I blinked, holding back the tears in my eyes. I felt like I was pinned to the shame of plagiarism. "I don't believe you plagiarized. The designer who reported you disappeared after that incident, but someone transferred $3 million to his account. I don't think that's a coincidence." "Irene, you're not wrong." Jackson's firm tone made me unable to hold back my tears. The pent-up grievances of 5 years burst out in that moment. I realized that someone believed me. In the end, I agreed to paint for Jackson. "But not now," he said. "On the day the truth is revealed, paint me first." At lunchtime back at the old house, Joshua's mom once again mentioned her wish for grandchildren. My heart trembled, and I found myself subconsciously looking towards Jackson's dad playing chess not far away. Facing the elders, he sat upright at the chessboard, missing a bit of his usual laziness. But his long fingers, resting on his lap, were caressing a smooth black stone, as if on purpose. In a moment of absent-mindedness, I remembered the touch of his fingertips brushing my waist last night. Suddenly, he looked up, tilting his head slightly in my direction. It was a small movement, but I suddenly snapped back to reality and hastily averted my gaze. Only to accidentally meet the eyes of Joshua looking at me. In the past, I would have been joyfully staring at him, but now I instinctively furrowed my brows and looked away. He instantly tightened his grip on the bead necklace in his hand. After dinner, Jackson followed us home. But as we entered, Joshua blocked the door. "Your room is not here." Jackson pushed past him and stood beside me, smiling innocently. "I know. But I have to accompany my sister." "You forgot, you told me yesterday, let's have a baby with my sister." Joshua fell silent, just staring at me. And I meekly hooked Jackson's arm, waving to Joshua, "Go out and play, don't disturb the two of us." 2 seconds later, Joshua left. The door slammed shut, echoing loudly. I stood there in place, momentarily stunned. Is he angry? But isn't this what he wanted? After a brief moment of distraction, Jackson summoned me over and we booked a flight abroad. I intended to confront the designer, Mike, who accused me of plagiarism. But to my surprise, I found out that Mike had been in a car accident a few days prior and did not make it. I stood outside the hospital for a long time, feeling the cold foreign wind sting my face. The next moment, Jackson stood in front of me, blocking the wind for me. "It's okay, there must be another way," I nodded, allowing the cold wind to mess up my hair. As my vision blurred, I felt momentarily disconnected from the world. Until a voice called out, "Mr. Joshua." Both Jackson and I turned to see a middle-aged woman not far away. It was Mike's wife. I pulled up my mask in silence. She hurried over to bow to Jackson, speaking cautiously and gratefully. I thought you weren't coming since you didn't answer my calls. You are our benefactor. Mike wanted to see you one last time, but he didn't get the chance. Jackson stood there somewhat dumbfounded. But he quickly regained his composure, his gaze turning cold and distant, his posture more formal. In that moment, I almost called out Joshua's name. He was learning well. Mike's wife hesitated for a moment, then casting a shy glance at Jackson, said, Mike didn't leave behind much money when he passed away. It's hard for me and the child to survive in this foreign land. Mr. Joshua, how about another $3 million to help us? Jackson lowered his gaze, looking coldly at her without saying a word. The pressure in the air was palpable. She nervously rubbed her hands. It's okay if you don't want to help, but Mike left some things behind, and they might end up with your wife Irene. That could turn out quite messy. When she mentioned my name, my heart sank inch by inch. Joshua, what have you done behind my back? Money is not an issue. Jackson's voice suddenly turned heavy, with a hint of displeasure, but this is the last time. Give me the things, and I will personally destroy them. If you dare to keep a backup, I will make you join Mike, of course, but I want to see the money first. Jackson squinted his eyes and coldly retorted, don't try to reason with me. I don't want to take a life. If you dare lie to me, I will send you down to join Mike. After a moment of hesitation, she pulled out a flash drive. Jackson connected it to his phone and checked the files inside. It contained phone recordings and chat logs. Suddenly, Mike's wife had a suspicion. Why aren't you wearing your prayer beads today? Jackson's finger paused, then he barely lifted an eyelid, just flatly saying 4 words. It's cold. Hands froze. Tomorrow, the $3 million will be transferred to your account. Hide well abroad for me. Leaving these words behind, Jackson turned and left in a hurry. I quickly followed him. Upon hearing those last words, Mike's wife's mind was filled with money, dispelling any doubts. She even warmly escorted us out. On the way back to the hotel, I listened to the recordings on the flash drive. Joshua with Mike, $3 million, don't bother Christina anymore, or I won't mind taking a life. Christina with Mike, I've sent you Irene's drafts, just make some changes and post them quickly, remember to make a big fuss. I sat on the bed, staring blankly. The sound of the recordings lingered in my ears, making my chest feel heavy. Christina, why would you do this? Joshua, where did I go wrong with you? But Jackson's knocking on the door continued, pulling me out of my sad thoughts. I opened the door. He stood there, his face full of worry as he looked me over. Seeing that I was okay, he visibly relaxed. I thought you'd be crying your eyes out in the room. I blinked my somewhat dry eyes, smiled bitterly, and said nothing. I was feeling too miserable, too sad to even cry. Don't worry, I'm fine. Go back to sleep, we have a plane to catch tomorrow. Jackson hesitated for a moment, looking at me for a while before taking a step back, pointing behind him. Should I really go back? I chuckled at his antics. Yes, go back. Good night. He finally turned around and left at ease. But the next moment, I suddenly grabbed onto the hem of his clothes. Thank you. He didn't look back. No need to thank me, it's a brother's duty to protect his sister. The next day, as soon as I rushed back to the country, I could hear a woman's giggles coming from inside the house. It was Christina. She was sitting astride Joshua, with a blush on her cheeks. Seeing me, she leisurely got up from Joshua and greeted me. Irene, you're back. At that moment, a string of jade beads fell from her skirt. They were sparkling with a watery sheen. It was the 18th birthday gift I had given Joshua. Now, it was being treated like this. I couldn't imagine how heartbroken I would have been if this had happened in the past. But fortunately, I didn't care as much now. After 3 years of not seeing each other, Christina still ran over to grab my arm as she did before. Why didn't you reply to my messages? I was worried about you, so I came to find you. Ended up hanging out with Joshua for a while. Even though they had gotten to such a point, they were still pretending in front of me? I withdrew my hand without expression, pushing her away mercilessly. The force was strong, and she fell to the ground directly. Christina. Joshua rushed over, helped Christina up, and sternly reprimanded me. Irene, are you out of your mind? Apologized to her, I decisively replied. It's impossible. This was the first time I had retorted to him like this. Joshua's gaze fell on me, with a hint of inquiry. Suddenly, he sneered, Are you throwing a tantrum at me? Irene, unnecessary. You know, I don't love you. Your little tricks will only make me dislike you even more. I looked at his face, feeling a bit lost. I had liked Joshua for 15 years, whether it was his lively and cheerful self when young or his quiet and obedient self after marriage, he had never once smiled at me. In front of me, he was like a frozen lake, letting me treat him however I wanted without causing a ripple. This was the first time he smiled in front of me. But it was filled with mockery, ridiculing the me who used to change myself constantly to please him. I sighed and calmly said to Joshua, "You're overthinking it. You don't deserve my temper anymore, Joshua. Let's get a divorce." The indifference and disgust in his eyes turned into astonishment. Seems like he didn't expect me to take the initiative to leave him. Irene. He squinted, lips forming a thin line. "This joke isn't funny." I shook my head. "I'm not joking. You like my cousin, right? Once we're divorced, you can marry her." Joshua stared at me intently, as if trying to find a trace of deceitful bravado on my face. I just looked at him quietly. "What? Don't you want to marry her?" Christina suddenly looked up at him. Joshua hesitated for a moment, then grabbed Christina's hand, interlocking their fingers, and looked directly at me. "Don't try to mess with our relationship, Irene. We can divorce, but I need you to tell my parents that you changed your mind in front of them. I don't want them to have a bad impression of me. And Christina has recently made a comeback in the entertainment circle. We can't afford any tarnish because of this." I fell silent. For the first time, I thought of using shameless to describe this man who had once been so important to me. He knew his parents liked me a lot, it was his fault to begin with, but now he wanted me to shoulder everything. Truly shameless. At that moment, Jackson next to me quietly cursed, "What a hassle to get a divorce. Concerned about a bad impression, you should just own up to your mistakes, you're not their only son." Saying this, he decisively took out his phone and posted a picture of Joshua and Christina holding hands in the family group chat. Joshua rushed forward to stop him, but he was a step too slow. The photo, along with Jackson's careless voice message, was sent out. Joshua cheated, brought his mistress home, and wanted to divorce my sister-in-law. The four of us were called back to the family estate. As soon as we entered, Joshua's dad's stern and cold voice rang out, "Joshua, kneel down." Joshua didn't move, just stood in the center of the hall, boldly saying, "I'm not wrong, I just found someone I truly like." As soon as he finished speaking, Joshua's dad's belt whipped across him. "Then why the hell did you marry Irene in the first place? She's a good girl, why did you play around and cheat?" Seeing Joshua being hit, Christina immediately rushed over. "Don't hit him. If you hurt him, your grandson will be heartbroken." "Grandson?" Christina touched her belly. "I'm pregnant, Joshua's." His parents stared at each other for a while, then looked at me in silence. In the end, Joshua's mom gritted her teeth and coldly said, "Then go ahead and hit him. Our family doesn't allow illegitimate children, I only recognize the grandchild born from Irene." "Mom, I don't like her. If you insist on the grandchild from her, your son is useless." Amidst the chaos, I calmly spoke up, "Mom, let's divorce Joshua. If I remarry in the future and have children, you can recognize them as your grandchildren." They wanted to persuade me, but my mind was made up. The divorce must happen. In their reluctant eyes, Joshua and I got our divorce certificate. That afternoon, Christina couldn't wait to announce on Instagram, accompanied by a picture of them holding hands. Perhaps to drum up publicity for Christina's comeback, Joshua, who didn't use Weibo, specifically registered to comment, "Hello, my wife." The two of them instantly became a hot topic. The nation's first love and the love story of a wealthy young master, with many people praising them as sweet. But there were also some different voices. I was only reminded of this Joshua being married before, and wasn't I accused of plagiarizing someone else's work before? Even though it was their announcement, I was forced back into the limelight. Once again being dragged out for scolding. Christina even messaged me, "Irene, thank you for giving Joshua back to me. When we get married, can you be my bridesmaid?" She was truly absurd. Thinking about it, I sent her a segment I found from Mike's wife's recording. "Listen to this. Do you still want me to be your bridesmaid? I'm sorry. Irene. I didn't mean to frame you." The once arrogant Christina on the phone was now grabbing my thigh, begging for forgiveness. "I beg you, I apologize to you. Can you delete those recordings, please?" Joshua stood by with a stern face, scolding me harshly. "Irene, enough." Christina has already apologized to you, what more do you want? First of all, if she apologizes, I have the right to not accept it. Secondly, you don't think you can get away with it. I released the recording of Joshua and Mike. His face of indifference finally collapsed into panic. He tried to come forward to grab my hand, but I slapped him. It hurt my hand and he awkwardly turned his head, but eventually lowered it to plead with me, let Christina go. I laughed in anger. Why didn't she let me go when she plotted against me again and again? Do I owe her? And you, arguing with her out of spite, why sacrifice my marital happiness? Joshua hung his head, devoid of his former pride, just kept saying sorry. I was tired of dealing with them. I directly exposed the whole situation. At the peak of Christina's high-profile comeback, she fell into an abyss. In an instant, she became a public enemy. She cursed at me, calling me despicable. Irene, you're just as despicable as your mother. She ruined my mother, you ruined me, our family is really unlucky to encounter you mother and daughter. And let me tell you the truth, I don't even like Joshua, I just want to steal your man. Just like your mother trying to seduce my dad back then. That's when I learned the reason for her resentment towards me. Because her mother, who is my aunt, and my mother had both fallen in love with the same man. My aunt had used schemes to force that man to marry her after getting pregnant, but the marriage wasn't happy. Ultimately, my uncle took his life by suicide. He had a drawer full of sketches. All of them were of my mom. When my dad found out about this, he completely fell out with my mom, which included me, who was learning art. Eventually, my mom committed suicide by jumping into the river. The two families fell apart. But I thought that Christina and I were not affected by this. However, she never forgot any of it. But that's okay. She better not mess with me again. I'm not done with her. After clearing my name, I reclaimed my degree certificate. The first painting I picked up the brush for was, as promised, given to Jackson. When the painting was finished, it was already dusk. The fragmented sunset outside the window sprinkled on Jackson's face. Let me take you for a ride on my bike, he suggested. This time, I didn't refuse. I sat on the back of his electric bike, feeling the faint scent of laundry detergent from him being carried by the evening breeze, just like countless times before. Only, this time I didn't cry and vent to him. Instead, he asked, "Why did you like my brother in the first place?" I was baffled. Upon careful thought, I truly didn't know how I fell for him. I just knew that by the time I realized this liking, I was already unable to extricate myself from the occasional closeness he showed me, even though it was more like charity. If there really had to be a reason, it might be because his grades were really good at that time. At first, it was admiration, but later on, it was probably love. Jackson fell silent. At the beginning, he really hated studying. I'm doing well in my studies now. Do you want to like me too? I lifted my head, watching his ears and the back of his neck gradually turn red. I have been your sister-in-law before. So what? Didn't we get divorced? I fell into silence, with various memories of our interactions flashing through my mind. Finally, I came to a conclusion. He was worth it. But it was too soon. I had just gotten divorced. Jackson instantly understood what I meant. Okay, I'll wait for you. I've already reserved the spot for your second marriage. At the age of 30, I decided to have a second marriage. With Jackson. Because of one careless mistake, I became pregnant. When he took me to the table and placed the pregnancy test results, his parents were so happy they couldn't close their mouths. Joshua, who had been dumped by Christina, stood on the side, staring at me intently. In the end, he seized the chance to corner me in the upstairs room. He took out the birthday gift I had given him back then. Irene, I cleaned it. I frowned, eyes filled with disgust. It's dirty, take it away from me. Joshua froze for a moment, his eyes gradually turning red. His gaze landed on my stomach. You're really pregnant? I chuckled lightly. Yes, just as you wished, except you won't have the chance to exchange Christina's child for mine. He opened his mouth, but couldn't say anything. He could only dryly and reluctantly ask, "Have you really fallen for my brother?" I didn't say a word, just looked at him as if he were an idiot. Suddenly, the door behind me was knocked on. Jackson's carefree voice came in. Sister-in-law, open the door, it's me, my brother. No, wrong. Fiancé, open the door, I'm here to pick you up. I politely smiled at Joshua, turned around, opened the door, and threw myself into Jackson's arms so he hugged me tightly and then looked at the face in the room that looked exactly like his own and smiled smugly. Thanks for giving up, brother, only because of that, I had the chance to seize the opportunity and marry her. I'll have you sit at the head table at our wedding. I planted a kiss on Jackson's lips and then turned to look at the regretful Joshua. Brother, remember to come to the wedding. Your title will be uncle to the children in the future.